All right. Wow. Welcome, everyone. It is so exciting to have a full house here. So I know many of you, and for those whom I don't know, my name is Ann Corso. I'm the executive director here at the Michener Art Museum. And welcome to the first Putman Arts Leader lecture series of this year, of 2026. So I want to, first and foremost, I want to thank the Putman family. I don't see Kevin and Ashley here tonight. They would raise their hands if they were here, but I know that they are so pleased with this program, and many thanks to the Putman family for endowing this series in honor of Mary Louise Putman. Our guest this evening is a luminary in the field of art crime investigation. Robert Wittman joined the FBI as a special agent in 1988. As a result of his training in art, antiques, jewelry, and gem identification, he served as the FBI's expert involving cultural property crime. And during his 20-year FBI career, he recovered more than $300 million worth of stolen art and cultural property. Wittman formed and led the first task force of agents and detectives against organized gangs who were thieving jewelry and precious cultural items that really ran rampant through stores and high-end institutions in the U.S. In 2005, he created the FBI's rapid deployment of national art crime team members, and he has represented the U.S. throughout the world, conducting investigations and instructing international police and museum staff in the recovery and the use of high-value asset security techniques in more than 20 countries. He's the recipient of numerous awards and commendations from various governments in Europe, Peru, and of course, the U.S. Department of Justice and the Smithsonian Institution. In 2010, he penned his New York Times best-selling memoir, Priceless: How I Went Undercover to Recover the World's Stolen Treasures. And his second book, The Devil's Diary, Alfred Rosenberg and the Stolen Secrets of the Third Reich, is a worldwide bestseller published in 29 languages. He was featured on the History Channel's Lost History series and has served as an expert witness in multiple state and federal cases. And now he is president of Robert Wittman Incorporated, a firm that specializes in consulting, security consulting in high-value asset matters, which include expert testimony, investigation, and collection management. So we are so pleased to have Robert Wittman here tonight and having him protecting the many cultural assets worldwide.
Recovers stolen paintings and founded the FBI's national art crime scene. I hear a lot of the suspects have been framed. Please welcome Robert K. Wittman. Hey, Mr. Wittman, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, Ann, you did a great job with that intro. I would have almost thought I wrote it myself, but I know I didn't, right? Very good. And I put this on because I like this introduction because it's going to give us some idea. We're going to have fun tonight. this is not your typical FBI talk, all the facts, just the facts, ma'am. It's going to be more fun than that. And we have some special guests we're going to bring up tonight and have them speak with us and tell us their sides of the stories, which is really interesting. Oh, it's good to hear other voices talk about how great I am. So this will be fun tonight. We're going to have some good times. And we're going to, maybe we'll learn something, a little bit of infotainment along with the fun. So let's talk, well, I'll just tell you real quickly. I do 6 of these talks. So if you enjoyed this tonight, tell Ann Corso, and maybe we'll come back next year. Who knows, right? You never can tell. But I do 6 of them. I do them on cruises. I do them on all these things around the world. And they're all different parts of art crime, frauds, forgeries, fakes, ancient treasures, antiquities, whatever you're interested in. We can talk about that because we recovered, working with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Philadelphia and with attorneys and prosecutors around the world, we've recovered all these types of things. So anyway, it's all just fun stuff that's interesting, and the behind-the-scenes stories with the guy who was in the room. That's what it's about, right? Learning what happened. So, but before we start, we have to look a little bit about the statistics. Why is art crime why does it exist? Well, you have to look at the industry. It's business. It's a $200 billion worldwide industry. That's the art market worldwide. It's legitimate. In the U.S., we represent 40% of that market, $80 billion. It's a lot of money. It's a big, big market. And back in 2003, 2004, I got a call from FBI headquarters. And I talked with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Philadelphia. And the call was from the New York Times. And they wanted to know what was the size of the art crime industry worldwide. So we did a research. We looked at all the cases that the FBI had. We looked at the cases that were in England with the Art Antique Squad at Scotland Yard, Metropolitan Police. We talked to the OCBC in Paris and also the Carbonieri course in Rome. And we came up with a figure. It's about $6 billion. That's the illicit cultural market in what we call art crime. And that's the property market, $6 billion a year. 75% of that, by the way, is not theft. It's frauds, forgeries, and fakes. So that's the biggest part of the art crime market. And basically, if you're in the business of buying, or not business, if you're interested in buying and selling art, that's what you need to look out for today, is frauds, forgeries, and fakes. That's the largest amount of complaints that the FBI Cybercrime Center gets. It's eBay fraud. It's people buying Picassos on eBay. Just remember, there's 2 S's in Picasso, right? We know that, right? There's no A in Monet, okay? M-O-N-E-T. So that's what happens. People buy these things, don't realize they're being taken, and then they become victims of frauds, forgeries, and fakes. So it's a big business. $6 billion worldwide is illicit cultural property market, and it's a lot of money involved. So back in the day, well, actually before I even became an FBI agent, there was this famous bank robber. Some of you might remember Willie Sutton. If you remember Willie Sutton or know who he is, raise your hand. There you go. I told you, Donna, my wife's in the back. She said, who's he? People will know. Willie Sutton, right? Famous bank robber. Wrote a book. It was called That's Where the Money Is. And why? Because he was asked a question on the way to jail by a reporter. Said, Willie, why'd you rob banks? And he said, what? That's where the money is, okay? So why do people do art crime? Well, because that's where the money is. Look at this today. Very interesting. Look at these cards and comic books. Now, when we talk about art, it's not always about sculptures, prints, and paintings. This is all part of the cultural property scene. That Tom Brady rookie card, although it is autographed, sold for $2.25 million. Right? It's from the year 2000. It's not old. The Action Comics, that's 3.5. Actually, a new record's been made on that at $10 million for one that's in better condition. But Heritage sold it for $10 million. Can you imagine? That's the first comic where Superman showed up. So that was $10 million. This Mario Brothers. How many of you had kids from the 80s and early 90s? I do. Well, you might have a Mario Brothers game up in your attic. Recently sold for $660,000. Yeah, think about that. And then the big one here, just floors me. It's a 1952, I believe, rookie card, Mickey Mantle. Sold for $12 million. $12 million for a baseball card, a little piece of cardboard, tops, right? $12 million. So what does that mean? That means if you got one, and I don't care what condition it's in, so it's worth hundreds of thousands. So if you got a little shoebox in your attic with old baseball cards in it, you could be the victim of a big-time theft if somebody comes into your house and steals your baseball cards. Seriously. And if you live here in Bucks County, which is great, but let's say you live in Philly and you call the Philly PD and say, somebody stole my baseball cards. How fast do you think they'll show up? Not very, okay? But they're worth a lot of money today. So take a look at your baseball cards, see what you got. Look for Mario Brothers. Not Mario Brothers, but Mario Brothers. See if you got one, because they're worth a lot of money today. But the whole industry, the whole cultural property industry has gone crazy. This dinosaur skeleton recently sold for $45 million. Now, I did a training for the police and prosecutors in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. Their biggest problem is the theft of dinosaur bones in the Gobi Desert. Yeah, because when they're going for 45 million, there's people there who are raping the desert trying to find these dinosaur skeletons, and they come back to the United States. Recently, Nicolas Cage had a Tyrannosaurus Rex skull that had to be sent back to Mongolia because it was basically looted from the Gobi Desert. It was the property of the country of Mongolia. Happens not just once or twice. In the Ulaanbaatar main museum, when you walk in, you'll see a giant Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton that was repatriated from a collector in Texas. And I bought it because it was stolen from the Gobi Desert. So these things are big money today, and they're bringing a lot of money in. And when they're proven to be coming from those types of countries, Brazil, Mongolia, other countries, they have to go back. And that's what happens. Big bucks. And of course, this is the granddaddy of them all. $450 million this Da Vinci painting sold for. I love the fact that if you see how they found it, and then what happened to it after they redid it, the difference, it sold for $450 million. So these are all legitimate sales. These are things where they're sold to collectors, and a lawful sale is whatever a willing buyer will pay a willing seller on any given day. So these are all lawful sales. But there is still art crime. Art crime is still occurring. So who are you going to call? Like I said, you're not going to call the Philly PD if your baseball cards are stolen. What you might want to do is contact the FBI. Because in 2005, the FBI started the National Art Crime Team. And today, if there's a crime that occurs that involves artwork, and that artwork may go across state or country lines, the art crime team could get involved. Now, I'm not going to say they always will, because I've had cases where I've referred them and they weren't interested in doing them. So sometimes they will, sometimes they won't, depends on the situation. But that is one of the resources that you would have, the Federal Art Crime Team. We started it in 2005. If you look at that logo, that's still the same logo. That's actually up there today on the website. So if you go to www.fbi.gov/artcrimeteam, you'll see that logo. It's the same one. And we started, like I said, in 2005. The idea was to create a list of the top 10 missing art pieces at the time. You've heard of the top 10 fugitive program? This was the top 10 fugitive art pieces. And at that time, we put them behind the initials to kind of publicize them. And luckily, today, this has been recovered. This is a Da Vinci that was stolen from a castle in Scotland. That's been recovered. This up here on the top is a golden sculpture. It was stolen from a museum in Vienna. It's called the Cellini Salt Cellar. And that was stolen at the time. Beautiful piece. That's been recovered. As well as this Van Gogh on this side. And of course, the monk Scream, stolen in Norway at that time. And it was missing, and we were able to recover that as well. So at least four of these pieces have been recovered out of the 10. Now, I have to tell you, the FBI had nothing to do with any of those recoveries, but we get credit because we had them on our website. So we publicized them, so people knew about it, so they were recovered. And just to give you some quick, like I said, the man in the room stuff, the ACT is the art crime team. I got a call, and this was in 2004. We were starting the team up, and the call came from headquarters. It was the PR guy, and he wanted to do a big loadout onto the internet for this to try to get people to call in, give us tips, and he wanted to come up with a good name for the team. So he's on the phone. I'm listening to him. I'm looking at these resumes of 75 agents that wanted to be on the art crime team, and I'm trying to figure out who's the best 8 people. We only had 8 people. So I'm looking at this, and I'm talking to him, and he said, well, what do you want to call it? I said, well, it's federal. It's not local. It's a federal team. So how about the federal? It's art. And I thought, well, Federal Art Recovery Team. And there was silence on the phone. And I said, what do you think? And he said, I don't think that's going to work. And I said, oh, well, was it too many letters? He said, yeah, that's it. So he's the one who decided, how about just art crime team? And I said, that's okay. That sounds good. But I thought the Federal Art Recovery Team would have been great, don't you think? But there are limitations to law enforcement. I mean, unless a situation occurs that's criminal, you can't call law enforcement. So yeah, if you have a theft, a fraud, forgery, a fake that takes you into a fraud situation, yeah, you can call law enforcement. But most of the situations in the art world, I can tell you today, I'm involved in multiple lawsuits in New York City, people who are suing each other based on dollar values of things. It's not fraud, forgery, or fake. It's basically civil cases, disagreements. And so as a result, law enforcement's not going to get involved with you. Now, my company, when we started it in 2008, we get involved in the recoveries as well. But we also do things like museum security, collection management. We work with people to identify what they have so they know what they have. Because you'll be surprised when we hear these stories of people who get taken because they don't realize what they have is valuable. Grandpa died, left us his baseball card collection. It's got a Mickey Mantle right in the middle of it. They had no idea. I'm not saying that happened. I mean, that's the type of thing that could happen. Next thing you know, they sell the collection for $350. But it's not illegal. It's not illegal. I mean, the person who has the knowledge is the one who's going to benefit. You don't want to be that guy. Nobody wants to be that guy, right? So as a result, we do get involved in collection management, identifying these things for people so they know what they're looking at, so they don't get taken. The whole idea is to be honest, upfront, and get what things are worth, or not worth, for that matter. You might have a nice collection, and your particular Mickey Mantle's a fake, a reproduction. You wouldn't know unless you find out. So that's the kind of things that we do now. As far as expert testimony, due diligence, provenance management, due diligence is really important. If you have an item that you bought, and you could have bought it from any auction house around the area, and it's worth $5,000 or more, and it's over 100 years old, and it was stolen from a museum 50 years ago, you're going to lose it. Because if you ever go back to try to sell it, it's actually a violation of a federal statute called the Theft of Major Artwork Statute. And what that says basically is if you have a piece that's worth $5,000 or more and over 100 years old that was stolen from a museum, it's a federal crime to try to sell it. So you have to be careful. And how do you find out? Got to do provenance research, due diligence, so that you don't get caught in that situation. We've recovered many pieces over the years, people who didn't know, but they came to find out. I remember a beautiful Daniel Garber piece. It was stolen from the city of Philadelphia. It was in one of the courtrooms at City Hall. It was all known from the PMA. Is that the PMA now, or is it the FART? PHRT or something? I don't know. I think they changed it back to PMA, didn't they? Philadelphia Museum of Art. So they had this painting in there in one of the courthouses, in one of the courtrooms, and it just went missing. And finally, we got a call from someone who was doing a catalog raisonné of Daniel Garber. That's I guess a catalog of all of his artworks. And he said he found this piece in a collection in California. It belonged to the PMA. So we were able to get that back as a result of that statute. So just to give you an idea, it was called Quarryville Lumberton. Beautiful piece. I think it's on display at the PMA today. So just to give you an idea, that collector had bought it from a gallery in Philadelphia, and he paid, I think, $25,000 for it, right, back in the day. And the gallery was good enough to give him back his money. And this was 20 years after it was stolen. Gave him back his $25,000. Now it's worth a whole lot more, of course, but you know they were able to do that. So you have to be careful what you buy. Due diligence is really important. And yeah, there's still a lot of art crime going on today. Museum thefts still happen. And of course, some of them are pretty famous.
FBI agent Robert Wittman, who founded the agency's rapid deployment art crime team during his career, helped recover $300 million worth of art and cultural property. Robert, you're the perfect guest for this moment. I mean, first of all, I was just surprised that it was apparently so easy to break into the Louvre in broad daylight.
Yeah, you know, the point there was, I think people thought that these guys were working at the Louvre. In other words, they were doing some type of construction, so they could make that noise, and then people would think, oh, it must be normal because that can't be a robbery in the daytime.
Yeah.
And they were wearing the yellow construction vests. I've seen that before. I was involved in an undercover investigation when a group stole paintings from a museum in Nice, and they were doing the same thing. They had the same kind of overall coveralls on, like they were employees, and they made their getaway on mopeds. It's a pretty common way of escaping in Europe because of the easy ability to navigate through the traffic, and so they can get away quickly.
Sounds like you think this is probably at least partly an inside job. To Molly's point there, when you steal millions of dollars worth of jewels from the Louvre, you don't just go into a pawn shop. So, what do they do with it?
Well, they are going to look at it. We hope that they're going to try to sell it.
Yeah.
You know, there's different ways that they'll try to monetize this. That's what it's all about, making money. So the worst way would be as if they melt it down, you know, pop all the diamonds, pop the gems, and try to sell them one by one.
Have you checked 47th Street here?
Yeah.
That's where that could happen.
It could be, you know. But I think that that's the worst situation. The best case scenario is maybe they come around and try to ransom them back. And what happened there is possibly, you know, the country of France might offer a reward for information.
Got it.
If you're going to do a crime, the way you get away with it is by doing it by yourself, leaving no evidence. In this case, and thirdly, tell no one.
Yeah.
In this case, it was a group of people, so there's more than one person. Yeah. They left a lot of forensic evidence, you know, behind. And basically, I'm going to tell you, they're going to tell people that they did it.
Right.
So when this reward number comes out, you're going to have people calling in saying, you know, we know something about this.
They're going to catch.
Robert, quickly, where does this stand in sort of the history of like thefts that you've seen? How big of a deal is this?
This is audacious. This is probably the fourth gold theft I've seen in the past few years in Europe. Just a month ago, September 17th, the Natural History Museum in Paris was hit again, just like this, okay, using cutters, all the same MO. And they stole a bunch of nuggets of gold worth about 600,000 euros. Wow. So I think, you know, if I was an investigator on this case, I'd be looking at that and this and seeing similarities, thinking there might be an organized group out there.
And the price of gold is so high right now, so there's a lot of motivation. Robert, thank you so much. Good to have you here.
So the thing that really surprises me is that I'm wearing the same shirt and coat. Did you notice that? That's all I got. Hey, Dad, did you know that? Same shirt and coat. Anyway, I think same shoes too. Anyway, so yeah, you know, so within 5 days they arrested all the people that were involved because they left all the forensic evidence behind. There was so much of it. They knew who these guys were, and the BRB, which is the Brigade Against Banditry in Paris, is one of the best investigative teams. I've worked with them. I know some of the guys on that team. They're fantastic. And they were able to arrest these individuals. They were talking to each other on the phone, on cell phones. They all lived in the same neighborhood. I'll tell you a funny story. I was on CNN, and you know John Miller, the law enforcement expert on CNN, he starts talking to Anderson Cooper, I'm there too, about these guys being the Pink Panthers. You've all heard of the Pink Panthers? And I said, John, the Pink Panthers haven't hit anybody since 2010. First of all. Secondly, they hit stores. They don't go into museums. And thirdly, they're not amateurs like these guys leaving all their stuff behind. They're like military individuals. They go in, they're quick, they get out. And I said, they know exactly what they're stealing. These guys were just rummaging. So I said, they're going to be caught in 5 days. They were. They were all caught. Unfortunately, there was no reward offer put out by the French government, which means that they had no recourse but to pop the diamonds and the jewels, sell them through Brussels, and probably melt the gold. So I don't think we're going to get them back. But that's because, and I do think it's because they didn't put out a reward number. If they had put out I don't know, €200,000 reward number, they might have gotten some calls. Because we've done that. We did that with a Goya that was stolen from a museum going between Toledo, Ohio, the Toledo Museum of Art, to the Guggenheim. It was stolen, went missing in Scranton when the guys who were driving it stopped for the night. So the crate was stolen out of the truck. We put out a reward. Within 3 days, we had the painting back. So it works when you do put the reward out. People try to get it back. The guy said he found it in his wall in the basement where his son was staying, and he assumed his son stole it. Turned out that when we did record checks, his son was in jail that day. Yeah, his son stole it. He went to jail. So that's what happens.
How is art crime committed? Because, from the movies, you see, a grid of lasers, and Catherine Zeta-Jones puts on a skin-tight suit, and somehow showing her butt helps get her through the grid.
That's what we think, isn't it? We always think of these fantastic Hollywood art thieves. There's Catherine Zeta-Jones and Sean Connery, and then Entrapment, of course. Pierce Brosnan. What was the movie? Thomas Crown Affair. How many people liked Thomas Crown Affair with Pierce Brosnan? Yeah, I liked it with Steve McQueen. Remember the first one with Steve McQueen, and that was pretty cool. Ladies, how many of you like Pierce Brosnan? A few of you? Okay, all right, go. He's a little older now. He doesn't look like that anymore. He's a little bit close, though. But he still looks good, yeah? You don't care? Well, the reason I ask is because when Priceless first came out, he contacted me. And he said he was interested in buying the book, basically, optioning the book for a TV series. And I said, are you going to be in it? He says, no. He says, I'm a movie star. I said, okay. Well, it didn't work out. But the reason I tell you this is because I've got his cell phone number, and for $50, anybody wants the number, I'll give it to you. Billy? There you go. We got a bidder. And of course, Cary Grant, right? Well, when I talk to college kids, it's a funny thing. They have no idea who Cary Grant is. They don't. I mean, it's like, I said, well, that's the Brad Pitt of the 1950s. And they all look at me like, who's he? So I don't know who the new guy is. Maybe Ryan Gosling or somebody. I don't know. Nonetheless, he did a fantastic theft movie back in 1955 called To Catch a Thief. Was it? He played a jewel thief in that. So yeah, it was a good movie. So these are your Hollywood art thieves. Handsome, debonair, gorgeous, beautiful, smart, rich. That's what that's what it is. Nah. Bob, you know all these people. I was going to tell you, we have some guests here tonight. I have Bob and Billy Goldman. Now, Billy is probably one of the best lawyers in Bucks County, and Bob's a lawyer. Anyway, Bob worked with me for 17 years. From 1988 to 2005, he left, right? And Bob was the prosecutor of all these cases at the U.S. Attorney's Office. So we're going to bring him up today and tell you a little bit from his angle how these things work. But in fact, I look at this group, and quite honestly, Bob arrested all of them. He prosecuted everybody up there. And that's 3 different cases of people. But these are your real thieves. They steal money, they steal this material. They don't love art. They're just trying to make money. And in the end, this is what they really look like. They're not Pierce Brosnan. They're not Sean Connery. They're the real thieves. So we're going to talk, the first case, we're going to talk about some cases now. The first one we're going to tell you about is a fraud case and a theft case and a forgery case, all mixed into one. That involved a show called the Antiques Roadshow. How many people here have seen the Antiques Roadshow? Okay, good. Well, for those of you who haven't, it's probably the #1 show on PBS, a television series that goes from city to city. And what happens is it utilizes professional dealers. And these dealers go into these cities and they identify great stuff that's brought in by the local people who live in those cities. And they tell them what it's worth. And they film this on TV and everybody finds a treasure. And it's a great, great show. Makes it very interesting. But from time to time, you have to understand that there's no fees for the appraisals. Nobody pays for this. And these people who are doing the appraisals are not certified appraisers, most of them. They're dealers. So they're not giving you an appraisal. They're giving you an opinion of value. That's how they get around it. Okay, so it's not actually an appraisal. Because if you get an appraisal, you're going to have to go through an appraisal group, like the AAA or one of the certified appraisal groups in the United States, and they'll give you the documentation and everything else. These are opinions of value that these dealers give you. Now, they don't get paid to be on the show. They have to pay all their own expenses. They have to pay for their hotels, their airfare, their food, everything. But why do you think they want to be on the show? Well, because it's promotion. If you get on the show and you find something good, you're going to get calls from other people around the country who have the same things. And then you'll be selling their material and getting commissions. And you might even get the people who come on the show to sell their material through you. So if you're a representative of an auction house or a gallery, it's great promotion. But here's the problem. If you go to a city and nothing good comes in under your category, you don't get on TV. So that's a loser. You've lost your money, all the money you paid out. So you got to get good stuff. Well, there was a group that was going on. It was called the AOPA. It was the American Ordnance Preservation Association. Basically, it was a group of military collectors who were dealers, who were experts in militaria, guns, knives, swords, historical material. And they were traveling with the roadshow early on in the first few seasons, and they were going from city to city, and the problem was nothing good was coming in. There was nothing that fell into those categories. So they started getting worried. This is costing us a lot of money, and what are we going to do about this? So they decided, well, what we'll do is we'll start having people come in that we know, and they'll meet us the night before, and we'll give them an object, a gun, a sword, something, and they'll bring it to the show, and we'll act like we never saw them before, and they'll tell us a story that they made up, and in the end, we'll get on TV. And so they started doing this. They did this in 2 or 3 cities and started getting a lot of calls from families around the country who had the same types of artifacts from their ancestors. The most famous one they did is this one coming up next. It's called the watermelon sword. And what it is, it's a Confederate sword that this individual came in the night before and got from them at the hotel. And he brings it in the next day, and he made up this great story. He says, well, we were living in Virginia, and we were going to build this new garage. So we went up in the attic, we were cleaning it out, and we found this sword hanging from a post in the attic. So we figured we were going to put it for sale at a garage sale and maybe get $25, $30 for it, maybe even $100. And so that's the story behind the watermelon sword. At one point, he says, and at one point we used to cut watermelons with it in the summer. We'd smash the sword. So watch the interview.
History or background, can you tell me about it? Well, it's a sword that I found about 22 years ago. My folks had bought a place down in Virginia, and we decided, or my family decided, that we were going to start to rebuild the house. And in the process of doing that, my brothers and I got stuck with helping to tear down the chimney, and that required going up into the attic, starting up there. And I found this thing hanging on a post. And pretty much for me, it became a plaything. Steve, it's quite an interesting sword. This sword was originally made in New Orleans. Bottom of the guard, right here, you'll notice is gold plated. And that plating would have originally been over the whole sword. Do you have any ideas as to value on this sword?
Well, watch his reaction.
No, I was going to tag it for a garage sale, as a matter of fact, between $50 and $200. Well, the tag for your garage sale price probably would have bought you a new garage. The sword's worth about $35,000 on today's market. Most Confederate swords are worth about $2,000 to $10,000. This happens to be one of the great rarities in Confederate swords, is this pattern. Did you say $35,000? $35,000.
Whoa.
It's a very, very important sword. Wow.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Everybody wants to be an actor. So the night before, he was in one of these guys' wedding. He was one of the groomsmen, so he knew him very well. He flew in the night before, got this sword, and brought it in the next day. So I don't want to destroy your ideas of the Antiques Roadshow, but you have to understand it's TV, okay? A lot of things on TV might not be true. Now, I think they're much better today. I think they really took a hit on this, and they've become much more stringent in what they do. And from what I've heard, it's pretty much legit now. But at the time, this was happening not a lot, but on occasion. So what happened here was they started getting really busy and doing a lot of business. And you can see they started putting these advertisements as seen on Antiques Roadshow. And they've spent $550,000 on just those 5 items that they bought over the course of that season. And then Antiques Roadshow loved that specific segment so much they ran it in their advertisements on the off season. So you kept seeing that one over and over again. So it became a big hit. So as a result, they finally went and found this individual here. And his name was George Pickett. And he was an ancestor to General George Pickett, I think a great-great-great-grandson. And everybody here knows who George Pickett was, General Pickett. If you know anything about Gettysburg, he was the one who ran had the Virginia regiment that was decimated, at the high point of the Confederacy at the 3rd day of the Battle of Gettysburg. And Pickett himself was wounded. He was shot in the arm. He had blood-stained clothing and a Bible that was blood-stained. And George's great-great-great-grandson inherited all of this. Well, these guys found out who he was and that he lived in North Carolina. So they went down to visit him. And over about a certain amount of time, they had a psychological salesperson working with them who gave them some ideas on how to penetrate this family. And they were able to convince George to sell these items to them for $80,000, these artifacts. And what they told him was that they were representing a new museum of the Civil War in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And they were working for the former mayor. Remember the former mayor of Harrisburg? He was buying all those artifacts for a while. I don't know if you guys remember that or knew about that. But he was basically involved in buying these artifacts for a Western museum and a Civil War museum. And so they told him that we were going to buy these pieces for that museum, and your family would be honored in that museum, and we would pay you $80,000 because that's what the stuff was worth. So within a week of doing that, they bought it, they turned around, and they sold it to the museum for $880,000. Well, everything was great until July 3rd of that year when George Pickett was at a gathering for the Battle of Gettysburg. It was all the grandchildren of the Confederate generals, and they were having a luncheon. And George was sitting next to a dealer. And the dealer looked at him and said, "Boy, you really made out okay on that deal, didn't you?" And he said, "Yeah, what deal?" He said, "The stuff you sold through the AOPA." He said, he sells to them. He says, "You got $800,000, huh?" He finds out, no, I didn't get $800,000. They told me it was worth $80,000. They sold it for $880,000. So George initiated a lawsuit in Philadelphia in federal court against these individuals at the AOPA. And I get a call from a guy named Jim Smith. Jim was the local federal court reporter at the Philadelphia Daily News, not at the Inquirer, at the Daily News. And he says to me, "Bob, you might want to come over and listen to this lawsuit. This kind of sounds like it's up your alley with the artifacts and things." So I go over with my partner, and we start listening to this lawsuit, and we start identifying all these federal crimes that these guys were involved with. And so as a result, we started an investigation for criminal investigation to look into the AOPA. And I want to bring, hey, Bob, you got a minute? Come up. I want to bring Bob up, Bob Goldman, who was the prosecutor on this case. He wrote the indictment.
How you doing? My greatest claim to fame is I was born in Doylestown. And my brother and I used to play in the prison right over here with the warden's son and daughter. And we also used to run through Mercer Museum and Fawn Hill, you know, as kids. At that time, the tours were given by Mercer's housekeeper. So that was good. I'm here to tell you the truth. I consider myself to be Bob's polygraph machine. If he says something that's not honest, my face gets red. So, but you guys can't see that. Yeah, Bob and I had a great run. He didn't become, and no one becomes an art investigator, an expert automatically. The first case I believe that Bob and I had, or the first two cases, when we were dealing with theft from interstate shipments, it was iron ore. Remember that? Not artwork. Bob's family had a history in the art business in Baltimore. And Joey Merlino, too. We convicted Joey Merlino, Skinny Joey, of stealing money from an armored car. And so we started doing that, and I had a love of history just because of my background. And Bob had a love of art because of his father and his mother and their shop in Baltimore. And we hooked up. And over the years, we've had a great time. The only complaint I have about Bob is he never gave me a police report, nothing in writing. You know, right? Before. So let me tell you, I guess I didn't plan anything on this, but
He never read them anyway.
We hooked up, and to tell you the truth, doing this type of work, we laughed every day. We had a good time doing these cases and many others. This case kind of shows you how if you can get into certain networks, you can solve a lot of crime. So we started with the watermelon sword, that part of the case, and then the picket case was next, and we kept digging. And the way the watermelon sword was given up was because the feds have a lot of money, we subpoenaed that guy who carried the sword in there from the state of Washington and flew him in front of the grand jury, and he gave it up. So that's how you kind of put some muscle, you know, to break these cases. We also, remember the $800,000 worth of items which were sold to the Harrisburg Civil War Museum? Well, these guys in the Antiques Roadshow would get the mayor drunk, you know, watching Sunday night football. And they had, does anybody know what a Zouave uniform is from the Civil War? It's kind of like a Turkish outfit, pantaloons and a fancy hat and very colorful. Well, the American ones are rare and very expensive, and the European ones, not expensive at all, because they had so many of those. Well, these guys had a European one, and the mayor had an American one, because they sold it to him, and that's in the museum. So one night when they got him drunk, they snuck into the museum exhibit, and on the dummy, they put the European uniform on the dummy, and they took the United States one, probably to resell.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. That's because you didn't write a report about it. What other parts on this case?
The Wilson sword? Yeah, so ultimately,
Yeah.
we issued a subpoena. Bob issued a subpoena. Bob puts out the subpoena. I just deliver them. And we subpoenaed AOPA's records. And they had like 4 large cabinets of, like file cabinets of records of all the people who had gotten in touch with them with their artifacts from their families. And it started from A to Z. So we started going through all those cabinets, and we started finding all these objects that basically they defrauded people out of. This is another piece up here you see. It's called the Wilson sword. It was from a family in New York, the Wilson family. They had contacted them and said, you know, we have this wonderful sword. our ancestor was a captain in the Union Army, and we want to know the value, what would it be worth? And they told him, well, we would give you $7,000 for it. That's what it's worth today. But we'll put it in the Harrisburg Museum. We'll create an entire room where we'll honor your captain, the captain and your ancestor. And as a result, you know, everybody will always remember him. He won't be forgotten. So they went back, the family went back, got together. They said, okay, we'll do it. Turned out the next week after they got the piece, they sold it for $30,000. Never went into the museum. There was no room. That's a fraud.
Right, and how these things keep growing. One of the two guys that were responsible for the fraud on Antiques Roadshow, one of the guy's father was the curator of the Civil War Museum in Philadelphia. And so we picked up a case. Can you put this one on?
That's another one.
Oh, that's a different, okay. There was the finest Confederate frock coat from the Civil War. There it is, right there. Some relatives of the curator of the museum in Philadelphia was given this uniform by family members who lived on Beale Street down in Memphis. And the curator from the Civil War that everybody trusted, including their family, told them that it was fake. It wasn't real. And yeah, they gave it away to the Salvation Army. Well, that's not true. So he ended up selling it, didn't he? Yeah, he ended up selling it. We prosecuted him. We tried that case and we convicted him. And one of the federal judges says this was the most exciting case she's had in her career, and, you know, because.
So this was the indictment that Bob wrote, and you can see all the different violations. Yeah, false statement.
Well, we used to have fun writing these things. Not that I like writing things that are legal, but in this case, I remember the opening paragraph in this indictment. It was at all times material to this indictment, General Robert E. Lee and 50,000 Confederate troops headed from Virginia to go through Harrisburg to take the city of Philadelphia. And that was fun writing that language. I'm a frustrated historian.
There's a lot of counts. Mail fraud, wire fraud. You can see theft from a museum, that one that was stolen from the Beale Street Museum in Memphis. All these different counts in this group. And there's three individuals ultimately that were charged with the crime. This was the father, this was his son, and then George Juno.
All three of them were ultimately convicted by Mr. Goldman here, and I just followed. I just, you know, I did the investigation, but he did all the hard, heavy lifting in court. That's what you need. You got to have that. Remember, you guys have seen Law and Order, right? You know how the beginning starts with the prosecutor and the investigators? That's true. It's really how it works. But one of the most interesting pieces we recovered in that case, now remember, we were going through each of these file cabinets, right? So by the time the case was over, we weren't actually finished yet through all the file cabinets. So when we hit the W's, we hit this particular piece, which is very interesting. That sword is considered the most valuable and finest naval presentation sword in the United States history. It's called the John Warden sword. And why it's so important is because John Warden was the skipper of the Merrimack or the Monitor, of the Union ship that was in the battle between the Monitor and the Monitor. And that was a battle, the first battleship, battle in history on using Ironsides. And you might know the history of that. They were shooting cannonballs at each other, and the ships had iron, and they couldn't be destroyed. So basically, it was a draw. But because of the fact that the Union Army, by that point in 1862, had been losing so many fights, they considered it a big victory for the Union Army. And John Warden was the lieutenant in command of that Union ship, battleship. He was the only person that was wounded in the fight. He was looking through the turret, and he was blinded by a piece of shrapnel. So he went into the hospital in Norfolk. And while he was there, he was actually visited by Abraham Lincoln to shake his hand. And the legislature of New York State, they presented him with this Tiffany presentation sword for his heroism. So he got that in 1862. Well, fast forward now to 1870, he became the commandant at the U.S. Naval Academy. And then in 1915, he actually presented his sword, his belt, and the scabbard to the U.S. Naval Academy as a gift. And it went into the Warden Room, which is still there today, as part of the museum holdings.
Let me just say two things, and then I'm going to sit down.
Now, you got an opening.
Oh, I do? Okay. I didn't rehearse for this.
Make it more.
Um,
That's because you came too late.
I think it's important. You see all the great work that Bob did, and he really has done a lot of great work. When we started doing this type of work, nobody in the FBI wanted to do it. It was considered to be property crime, and who cares about art, and who cares about historical objects. And, you know, we decided to do it because we were having fun, right? Yeah. Go ahead.
What he's saying, it wasn't a high priority. It still isn't a high priority today. If there's 10 priorities, it's number 10 and a half. Okay.
The other thing I wanted to say is, because my brother had a restaurant called Roosevelt's in Doylestown, and I collect Teddy Roosevelt items. The high point of my career, aside from working with Bob Wittman, is the last week that I worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office, we returned a Teddy Roosevelt's gun that he took up San Juan Hill. And we returned it to Sagamore Hill during my last week working in the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yeah, it was stolen, right?
Yeah, and like Roosevelt's my hero. And so that's the best thing one of the best things that I think that we ever did.
Yeah. So just to let you know too, now Bill, Roosevelt's not there anymore, but Lulu's is. So if you've been to Lulu's, Lula's is there. A very good place to have a good meal. So yeah, this sword, we recovered it, and we're able to get it back. Just to let you know, it went to the Naval Academy in 1915 or so. Around 1930-31, it was stolen from the U.S. Naval Academy. Now, what had happened was, and we were able to go back and find out, a plebe had lost his spot at the Naval Academy, was sent home. Well, he went into the Warden Room and he took it as a souvenir. So he goes back home and he tells his family, oh, I went through New York City and I bought this at a pawn shop in New York City. So fast forward now to 2005 or so, right? And Antiques Roadshow's on TV, AOPA's there. They call, the two grandsons call AOPA and say, we have this sword that our dad brought home from New York City, and we want to know the value, we'd like to sell it. So they look at it and they say, oh yeah, that's great, it's a great sword, and we'll give you $150,000 for it. So they say, oh great, they took it. And then as it turns out, they sold it the next week again. That's what they do for $350,000. A dealer, or not a dealer, but a collector in Chicago. So once we found this sword, we did the research and we were able to find out it was stolen. There's a record from the Sergeant at Arms for the Naval Academy in 1930. And so we went to the collector and we were able to get the piece back and present it to the U.S. Naval Academy. That's what it looks like. And that was at the presentation ceremony for the Commandant and for the head of the U.S. Naval Academy Museum. It's still there. If you go down to the Naval Academy, if you have any contacts, you can go look at the Warden's sword. It came out of Philadelphia. Of course, after it was stolen from the Naval Academy. We didn't charge anybody. They'd already been charged on this. And in fact, we couldn't prove they knew it was stolen. So as a result, they didn't get prosecuted for this, but they were involved in a recovery. They had to pay the collector back the money, which is what they do because they keep them as a client for the future. These guys are not out of business. They're still doing business, okay? And they're important because they're the only people who know where everything is. That's what dealers do, So collectors want that stuff. They go to these dealers, even though they get prosecuted and go to prison and everything else. They come out, they're still in business. So we talked very quickly about some museum thefts. Insider theft, 90% of all museum heists are internal. Okay, I mean, that's a result of a research we did at the Bureau. 89% are internal thefts. Then there's armed robberies and there's burglaries. Because we're in Doylestown, we have to talk about another Bucks County situation at the Pennsbury Manor. How many people here have been to the Pennsbury? I would think most of you have, yeah. You know, it's the home of William Penn. He was there from, he built it from 1683 to 1700. I know that because it says it up there on that plaque. And that's where William Penn lived for those 17 years. In the mornings, he'd come to Philly and his city, and he'd come down the river, you know, because it's a tidal river. In the evenings, he'd go back up when the tide came back in. And that's what he did. And that's how he ran the city of Philadelphia. Well, what happened here was there was a group of individuals who were basically, they were antique dealers, kind of. They're pickers, what we call pickers. But not the kind of pickers you see on the History Channel. You know, those guys that ride around those beautiful trucks and all that? No, pickers generally pick trash. Okay, they go around on trash day and they see what people are laying out on the curb, and they'll pick up these things and refinish them, do whatever they can, and then go sell them. And these three friends were doing this and making a little bit of money on the Tuesday once a month antique auction. I think it's in Ben Salem. And so they were going there and doing this, and they were pretty happy. You know, they liked what they were doing. So one March night, they're riding around. It's raining, it's cold, but they have nothing for the Tuesday auction. So they get this brilliant idea. They've had a few beers. They got beer muscles now. And they decide, hey, let's go to that place we went to in the 5th grade, that historic house. And I know they got great antiques in there. So let's go there and get some of those antiques, and we'll sell them Tuesday at the auction. Not a brilliant idea, not really the best. I'll go back very quickly, just for fun, and because I want to show you. Let's see. It was these three guys right here. The guy in the middle, and then these two, okay? Now you notice they're all dressed alike? That's not a coincidence. It's the way it ended up. So they decide they're going to do this. So they go to the Pennsbury Manor. It's like I said, it's about 11 o'clock on a Friday night. They've had a few beers. They're very happy. They go in and they steal basically 40 pieces out of the Pennsbury Manor, including pieces that were actually owned by William Penn, owned by the family.
Tell them how they got in the house.
Well, so they go in, and what happens is this. Now, we, did this investigation. And you guys know, you've seen the first movie with Tom Cruise, right? Mission Impossible, where he's coming down from the ceiling very quietly. And, if he touches anything on the floor, all the alarms will go off and everything will go crazy and the police will show up. Well, that's not what happened. No. What happened was when we got there, we saw this very big black footprint right here on the door. Now, see, in FBI terms, that's called evidence. Yeah, that is. That's evidence. So, we can figure out that they didn't actually get in. That's a lead, right? Because they didn't actually get in because they knew anybody. They had to kick the door in. Now, I went to the academy, 16 weeks. I know these things, okay? So as a result, we figured, it probably wasn't an inside job. So we were able to, at that point, to determine that, it's going to be a burglary, but we still got to talk to the 50 to 75 people who work there and do interviews of everybody to find out. So we did, working with the state police, local police, and ultimately there was no information, no leads that came out of the workers. So we figured, well, this is a burglary. So we did what good police do always. We just took the file and we put it on a shelf. And we waited. Well, about 3 months later, I got a call, and it was from the state trooper. And it's a Saturday morning. He says, Bob, can you come up? There's an individual who was caught last night driving down I-95. He was weaving around 11 o'clock at night, and a trooper pulled him over for suspected drunk driving. And this is right up around 95 near Ben Salem. So they pull him over, and as the trooper's walking up to the car, he gets a bullet, be on the lookout, on his radio. And it says, be on the lookout, there was a burglary of a pizza parlor in town, okay, that night. So be on the lookout for the safe that was stolen. All right. So he walks up to the car, license and registration. Guy has license and registration. It's all good. It's legit. He says, very good, it's all good. He smells beer, a little bit. And he just does what we call a wing spread search. He just takes his flashlight and looks in the back seat. He doesn't go into the back seat. He just looks behind the driver's side. And in there is a safe. Well, that's a clue. That's a good clue. So as a result, of course, he arrests this individual with suspicion of the burglary from the pizza parlor, and it's because he's got the guy's safe. So he's locked up. Well, what does he do? The guy's locked up. He calls an attorney. He gets a lawyer, a public defender. And he says, I got information about the big Pensbury Manor heist. So the trooper calls me on Saturday morning. We drive up. We go meet with him in the prison. He says, yeah, I was involved in it. He says, and we had 2 other guys that were with us. We all grew up together, and we did the job together. We all went in. We stole the stuff. Of course, the next question is, okay, where's the stuff? Let's get it. And he says, well, we took it all, and we put it in green plastic trash bags, and we hid it all in my girlfriend's garage. Great, right? This is good. So I say, okay, who's your girlfriend? Where does she live? So it's near here, and he says, it's her name. And so we go to the house. Now it's 9 o'clock at night. So, at 9 o'clock at night when the police and the FBI show up at your door, it's a problem, right? Usually. And she's living at home. She's 19. So we say to her father, we say, we're here to talk to your daughter. And he said, okay, hey, hold on. He gets her, brings her down. And we say to her, listen, we're here to talk to you about your boyfriend, the one that's in jail. And she says, yeah, what about him? And we said, well, did he put some material in your garage? And she said, yeah, he put a bunch of bags back there into the garage. So I said, do you know what's in there? And she said, no, we have no idea. So I said, okay, well, let's go get it. She looks at me kind of strange, and she says, did he tell you? I said, no, what? He says, well, he told us to get rid of it. So we threw it all in the river. That's right.
The Delaware River.
Delaware River. That's exactly what I said. That's what you did. I said, what do you mean you threw it in the river? Well, he said, get rid of it. So we took it down Columbus Boulevard. It was Delaware Avenue back then. And you know where the Coast Guard station is down there? We went back there on that pier and we threw it all in the Delaware River, into the river. So next morning we get the Philadelphia Police dive team, and they came out and they went into the river, and we got lucky because we started to be able to pull some of these pieces out. And if you go to the Pensbury Manor today, you'll see them. You'll see these pieces. They're back. We got about 36 pieces back, all told. And it was a good thing that we could do that. Unfortunately, the one biggest piece that we lost was this jewelry casket. Some of you might remember it, being so you're from here and probably were there at the time. This was a jewelry casket actually owned by Mrs. Penn. And it was considered one of the finest in existence from that period, 1685, in existence. And valued at the time about $75,000. But as a result, because it's made of wood and it was in the river, it floated away. So it's gone. We never could get that one back. So we do lose things when these individuals do these thefts. It's damaged. Look at the crown jewels in France, and you can see the damage. So the really important thing about this case, though, and not just the fact that it was, Pensbury Manor, it was William Penn, the founder of our state, but also the fact that this was the first time in U.S. history where we used a statute called the Theft of Major Artwork Statute. That's all Bob. He did that. Want to tell him about that? Do you remember?
Yeah, I did that one. You don't want to hear anything about the law. But this statute was sitting on the books, and we didn't go into detail on this, but the federal authorities don't have jurisdiction just because it's artwork. And so you need a federal hook in order to prosecute the case, and for the feds to get involved, for the FBI to get involved. So when you're investigating the case, Bob and I would try to figure out what kind of statute could we find, and in order to bring a federal prosecution. And we found this statute that was in the books, and nobody had ever used it before. And we used that, and that's the go-to offense now for any theft from a museum.
Yeah. But what happened was it was passed in 1995, the statute. And it really was put forth by Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts when he was a senator. And what it says basically, someone steals from a museum any object of cultural heritage worth more than $5,000 and over 100 years old, or worth $100,000 any age. If it's stolen from a museum, it's a federal violation under that statute, that law that was passed. And basically, it was put forth by Kennedy as a result of the Isabella Stewart Gardner theft, which many of you probably know about. In 1990, two individuals dressed as Boston police officers went to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum and stole $300 million worth of art, which, by the way, has never been recovered. It's worth $500 million today, and there's a $10 million reward for the recovery of the artwork. So if any of you know where it is, call Bob and Bob. Let's work together on this, and we'll bring Bill in too. We need good lawyers on this. So as a result of that theft, Kennedy put this in and make it a federal crime to steal from a museum. And there's a second part to it, which is even more interesting. Anyone who tries to sell or exhibits or maintains a piece stolen from a museum, right? If it's stolen from a museum under those parameters, they're actually liable criminally as well. So there's an A and B. That's why you have to do the due diligence, because you don't want to get locked up because you're trying to sell a stolen object from a museum.
And if you do end up with a piece that's stolen from a museum, you can never sell it.
Right.
Because selling it would be a crime.
So all those things come together.
If you know. And what we would do, because a lot of people don't know that it's stolen, we would tell them that it's stolen, and you can't sell it. So now they had something worthless, and we were able to get things back because people were afraid of being prosecuted, right?
Yeah, so that's why this case was important. It was the first time in U.S. history where they used that statute, which has been used many times since then. And so that is now the go-to museum protection law in the United States. But Bob prosecuted it for the first time. It was actually appealed and it was held to be constitutional by the Third Circuit Court of Appeal here in Philadelphia. So lucky us, we're the first ones to get heisted.
Just one other one which you probably didn't want to talk about, and it'll take about a minute. We would always look for statutes. There's the Migratory Bird Act, which protects eagles and eagle feathers, and we use that to recover. In the last Indian powwow in Oklahoma, Geronimo wore a Comanche eagle headdress, and it got passed down through the years to a Texas oilman who got divorced, had a trophy bride. The trophy bride liked money, so the oilman put it on the market to sell. We saw that it was being sold. We figured it was stolen.
He was a lawyer.
Yeah. But what we did in that case, because we kind of felt bad, he's got this thing passed down to him from his family. Maybe he doesn't know it's stolen. So what we did was...
It's not stolen. He just can't sell it.
We can't sell it, but we copied the statute. Bob went undercover. I got him the statute. Bob sent the statute to him and said, it's illegal to sell this. And the guy said, yeah, I know that. So Bob tricked them into coming up to Philadelphia to save money for taxpayers. We didn't have to travel to Texas. And he delivered the beautiful war bonnet. It's from head to the floor. And I think it's now back in a museum, a Native American
Oklahoma.
Yeah, museum.
The Apaches, they sued the Comanches because they said they both wanted it. Because the Comanches said they just lent it to Geronimo, or didn't give it to him. And there's two museums on the reservation, so that goes back and forth. It's like that Aikens painting, that goes from the PMA to the PAFA. It's like that, back and forth.
Am I done now?
Yeah, you can sit.
Nice speaking with you.
Thanks, Bob, for coming up. Appreciate you being here. It's great. So we've talked all about these artifacts, these jewelry caskets and all this other material that's been stolen. And, we can't do an art theft talk without at least one painting. So let's do one painting, okay? This is a Operation Bullwinkle. This was an undercover operation where we were able to recover a $35 million Rembrandt that was stolen at gunpoint from the Swedish National Museum in Stockholm, Sweden. In this case, I went undercover as a buyer for this particular piece after getting some information from agents in Los Angeles. So we started this. This is what it looks like. It's a beautiful little piece. Yeah, it was done in 1630 when he was 24 years old. And it's on copper. And he used gold flecks in the paint. And really, for those of you in the museum industry and with knowledge, you can see the use of curious squirrel, you know, when he did this painting. Back at that time, you know, it wasn't normal in portraits to have shadow. But that's what makes it interesting, is the curious squirrel. And that's been used, of course, for years. You'll see it on the cover of Time magazine with photographs and that type of thing. But it's that. He's the one who really came up with it and made that happen. So his portraits are fantastic because of that shadow. So this one was a special one that he had made on copper. And it was stolen from the Swedish National Museum in Stockholm in 2000. What happened was 3 individuals went into the museum, they pulled a boat up, and they went into the museum, and they had machine pistols, guns. They put everybody on the floor. It was 5 o'clock on December 23rd, cold, dark. Nobody was in the museum. Everybody's out Christmas shopping. And they go around the museum. They stole 3 paintings, 2 by Renoir and this Rembrandt. They made their getaway by going back out and then getting on a high-speed boat that was parked right there at the museum on the pier. And they had set off 2 car bombs in the city to stop the response of the police and the fire departments. So it took them 40 minutes to get through the traffic and the car bombs to get to the museum. By that point, they were gone. They had gone up into the harbor, jumped off of the little boat that they had, ran up the steps, and were in the city lost. Well, they made a clean getaway. They had 3 paintings worth $42 million, 2 Renoirs and a Rembrandt, all stolen from at gunpoint. As they went into the city, though, there was a fisherman who happened to be out, and he saw the boat pull up, and he saw these 3 men jump out with these objects, and they ran up into the city. He thought that was suspicious. So the next morning, when he reads all about this in the local newspaper, he calls the Swedish police, not the Stockholm City Police. And he says, you know, I saw this thing last night, these 3 guys running up the steps, and I can show you where the boat was. So that's great. What a lead, right? So they go down, and they look where the boat was. Fantastic. The boat's still there. There's, of course, identification numbers on the boat. So they go back, they look it up, the registration, and they find the owner. They go to the owner. And he says, yeah, these people came to me about 3 months ago, and they bought my boat. And they said, okay, great. Do you have information? He says, no, I don't really have any information on who they were. I didn't ask. They said they wanted the boat, so I sold it to them. So these 2 detectives were dejected at that point. They couldn't believe it. They started walking out. Finally, the boat owner, he says, well, do you want their credit card number? I swear, the detectives told me this. And they said, yeah, we'd like to have their credit card number. So they bought it with a credit card. So as a result, they were identifying these people, and they were able to identify 10 people who were involved in the conspiracy and the theft. Put all 10 on trial. They recovered 1 of the Renoirs at that point and put them all on trial. They all got 8-year sentences, except for 3 of them were acquitted. The other 7 got 8-year sentences for the armed robbery. Well, that's great. They recovered 1 of the Renoirs, but of course there's still a Renoir out, and the Rembrandt, the $35 million Rembrandt. So fast forward, 2005, 5 years later, I get a call from one of our agents in California, Chris Calarco, great guy. Chris says to me, Bob, you know anything about this theft from Stockholm a few years ago? You know, it was a Rembrandt or a Renoir. I said, yeah, that was a big deal. I said, you know, what do you have? He said, well, the drug squad has come to me, and they've got a lead on this guy here in L.A. who sells drugs. He's a Bulgarian drug dealer. And supposedly he's talking about selling that Renoir that was stolen from the Swedish National Museum. I said, Chris, that's great. I said, we had just started the art crime team. I said, look, let the drugs go. Let's get that painting. That's important. You know, we'll get the drugs too, but the painting's important. So I'll see what we can do. A couple weeks later, he calls me. Again, it's a Saturday morning. It's always Saturday morning. And he says, well, good news. He says, we got the Renoir. I said, what happened? He said, well, this guy Boris, the Bulgarian, was going to go and take the Renoir out and sell it. So we followed him. He went to a pawn shop on Wilshire Boulevard. It was in a safe in the pawn shop. And as he came out of the pawn shop, we grabbed it. We grabbed the painting. I said, did you get it identified? He said, yeah. We took it to the Getty Museum. And the curators there said they identified it as the young, I think it's called the Young Parisian. And it was the stolen Renoir, worth about $4 million. Fantastic news. So I said, listen, did you go back and talk to Boris? Can you go back and say, hey, what about the Rembrandt? Because that was the big painting. He said, well, go check. So there was 3 agents involved. They went back and they talked to Boris. He comes back to me, the agent does, he says, Bob, good news. Boris knows where the Rembrandt is. I said, where? He says, still in Stockholm. I said, well, can we get it? And he said, yeah, Boris said he can introduce us to the people who have it. And we can do this undercover operation. So I started Operation Bullwinkle. And the reason we called it Bullwinkle is we had Boris the Bulgarian. We didn't have Rocky the Squirrel or Bull, or Natasha. But now you know how the FBI names these operations. I think the best one I ever did or ever heard of was one we did. It was called Operation Bullpen. Right? It came out of San Diego, and it was fake. It was fake autographs, like on baseballs, baseball cards, and it was all that fraud. But what was so cool? Bullpen, get it? Bullpen, I thought that was really clever. Anyway, so we had Operation Bullwinkle. So what that was an operation to go to Sweden, meet with these individuals who had these paintings up in Stockholm, had this painting in Stockholm, and then basically do an undercover buy. So we offered $250,000 for this painting. Remember, it's worth $35 million, but they couldn't sell it for 5 years. For $250,000, it was worth it. They said, okay. The only problem was we couldn't go to Sweden. And the reason was that Boris was wanted in Sweden, and he had to go with me to introduce me. So we didn't do it. We did it in Copenhagen, Denmark. And that's because we are geographically challenged. We could have gone we could have gone to Norway. It's right across the border, right? But no, we had to go 5 hours away on a train in Copenhagen. But that's where we did it. So we started this operation in Copenhagen. We stayed at the Scandic Hotel, which is one of the 3 Scandics. This is the one right by the train station, make it easy for them to go back and forth. This was the room that we used. This was my undercover. What I was doing was acting as a negotiator buyer for the Russian mob, okay? So this is the big-time negotiator for the Russian mob. This was my room. I just want you to see that because I want you to know we didn't waste any taxpayer dollars. We stayed within per diem for the U.S. government in Denmark, and that was the room we were using. So finally, after about 2 weeks of meetings with these people and back and forth, and there's a lot of little things going on, I tell them, look, go back, get the painting, and bring it back. The Russians are getting angry, and if we don't get this done, we're going to be in big problems. They said, okay, so they leave. They go back up to Stockholm. Next morning, I get a call from the Swedish National Police. They said there was a lot of activity. These 3 guys were going between different houses last night, and this morning they've gotten back on the train. They're coming to Copenhagen, 5-hour train ride. They asked me, do you want us to arrest them? I said, no, don't arrest them. Let them come. Let's make this thing happen. We don't have any mistakes. So they come down on the train. They get off the train. At that point, the Danish police pick up the surveillance, and they follow them back to my hotel. Now, 2 guys stay outside with a package. When they were on the train, they had a bag, and inside the bag was a rectangular object the size of the painting. All right, so they stay outside with the package. One guy comes up to my room, and what he does is he comes in, we talk. Finally, I say, okay, I'm going to show you the money. So the first thing we're going to do is show them the money. And you're seeing the undercover videos. There's actually 2 guys. And that's $250,000 in US $100 bills. And you can see he's counting looking at every pile, make sure it's real. So it's good. Everybody's happy. The money's there. This is the first time in 5 years that they've actually monetized any of these stolen paintings, and they're looking at $250,000. So I say to them, it's all good. Go get the painting. Remember, I don't know where the painting is. It's outside, I know, on the corner, but I don't know anything about it. So they say, okay, we're going to leave. So they go out. I'm sitting there waiting. Finally, I get a call. It's the Swedish police. They said something went wrong. I said, what do you mean? Well, they took off. They ran away. I said, they ran away? I said, what are you going to do? He said, well, do you want us to arrest them? I said, no. I tell you what, if they get back on the train, then stop them. We'll wait to see if that's what they do. I said, okay. So I'm standing there in that little room. I'm going back and forth thinking, oh, man, what did I say? What did I do was wrong, right? And finally I get another call. It's the Swedish police again. They say, everything's okay. They're coming back. what they had done, they had gone to another hotel. The night before, a fourth guy had come down by himself. He had the painting. That thing that they had in the bag was just a decoy. So had we done anything, had we stopped them, had we arrested them, had we done anything, they would have known we were police. So luckily we didn't. Therefore, they went and got the painting at the other hotel, and they were on their way back. That guy was already arrested, so that was done. So now they come back, and the first thing they're going to do is they're going to bring me the painting. We have to authenticate it. So I looked at it, and I'm looking at the back and the front, and I had seen that I had some great photographs from the museum on the back of the painting, and I saw there were 4 screws holding the painting in the frame. And there was a way to tell that there was the same screws because they were in the same angles. So at that point, I realized that this was the same painting. There was no problem. They never took it out of the frame. I even said to them, "You never took it out of the frame, did you?" And they looked at me and they said, "Of course not. It's a Rembrandt." So, I said, "Excuse me," which is I really said that. And what's funny about that is that at the time I did this talk at the Frick Museum in New York, and Steve Martin was in the audience. Yeah. And when I said it, I said, "I have to send you a check, Steve." I really said it. And so they said, "Yeah, of course not. It's a Rembrandt." I said, "Well, I thought you guys, loved art." And he said, No, we just want the money. But they knew they had a Rembrandt. They knew what they had, okay? So at that point, we know it's real. It's all good. There's nothing left to do but the bust. So the code word here is this is a done deal. So when I say that, the Danish SWAT team is going to come breaking the door down. They're going to rush in immediately, and they're going to grab the painting and save me and arrest these guys and save the day. Watch what happens. Listen to the done deal.
I think it's right. I think we've got a done deal.
Done deal. You heard it. Here they come. You heard it. Here they come. Here they come. Here. Oh my God! Thank God. Every time I watch this, I get excited. Every second, it's like a year. At that point, I'm hiding in the bathroom. I used to teach at the FBI undercover school in Quantico, and I tell the young agents, I'd say, "Go hide in the bathtub, because that'll give you good cover from the bullets, if that's what you're going to do." So I ran out of the room. I took the painting, gave it to Chris Calarco, the agent from Los Angeles who started it, and we took it upstairs to a safe room, and I put it on the bed with the $250,000 in cash. And I never thought I'd ever show this picture in public, but that's what $250,000 in cash with a $35 million Rembrandt. That's what it looks like. And of course, as fishermen, we all have the catch of the day. So that's how you prove you were there. Anyway, that was the recovery of the Rembrandt. These guys were all arrested. They were all convicted of trying to sell stolen property. Interestingly enough, within 6 months, they were let off of their sentences. The European Union courts let them off. The reason for that was because they said it was a civil rights violation, because Boris was the father of one of these guys, and he gave up his own son to get out of that drug deal in L.A. So Boris was looking at 10 years in prison in Los Angeles. As a result of this, he got probation from the federal court. It was the biggest, what we call downward departure in Los Angeles history for federal court. 10 years to probation based on his helping us catch his son. And but of course that got thrown out, but we didn't care. Within a week, the painting was back in the Stockholm Museum. You can go visit it today. It's still there, thank God. And that was the Rembrandt that came back.
You travel the world.
Yes.
You're like Rene Russo in the Thomas Crown Affair. I'm sure you look just as good in a lace dress. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Robert Wittman, Art Cop. The book is Priceless.
I think they're $16. I don't think they're prices. Last I saw, they were $16. I think they're selling for. Listen, thank you guys for coming tonight. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Nice. It really is a pleasure to speak in Pennsylvania. I really, it's great because you're my neighbors and my friends. You're not just audience. I do this all over the world, and it's fun. You go to Mongolia or something, you do a talk. But you know what? It's nice to be with my neighbors. So thanks for coming out. Appreciate you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Bob. This was incredible.